I'm Jocelyn Langer. I'm the Executive Director of NOFA Mass, and I am participating remotely today, but it's fun to join you guys here. Welcome to the 36th Annual NOFA Mass Winter Conference, and we're going to be talking about religious diversity on the farm. And before we get started, we just want to we want to run through a few announcements, and I'm just going to wait a moment for Zoom slides to advance. There we go. Yeah, so we are presenting this conference on land that was inhabited by the Nipmuc people prior to European colonization. And so we encourage you to learn more and honor those whose land you now occupy. And you can find more information at nativeland.ca. We want to also recognize that our agricultural system is built on stolen land and the forced labor and exploitation of stolen Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. Our conference aims to help address this harm and bring equity to the food system. So hopefully folks had an opportunity to participate in our BIPOC and White Ally Caucus groups, which happened a little earlier today, and we will continue that conversation throughout the year. We also want to thank our partner level sponsors who make this all possible, as well as our supporter level sponsors. And of course, our online auction supports our educational and advocacy work throughout the year. So if you haven't checked that out already, you can go to this website and there's a QR code there. And I think there's also a QR code on the door on your way out if you're in person, and bid on this auction to support NOFA Mass. So at this point, I'm going to stop screen sharing and turn things over to Miriam. Thanks so much for joining us today. And Mark you can bring up your slides, however you want to do that.
I can do it, thank you. Okay, screen share. So I've got a presentation. Folks are able to see that? Oh no, yeah. That's not what I wanted to share. There we go. Okay. You can see that. You can see that. We're here. Brilliant. Well, thanks for this really sweet group of people out in this room. It will be very intimate, so like really great to jump in and ask questions. Yeah. And we'll have plenty of time to just like talk and see where the conversation leads. But yeah, we'll start. Thanks, Jocelyn, for the intro. Really helpful grounding, especially like in the context of religious and cultural diversity on the farm. Really helpful to remember the wide swath of what it means to be a farmer and who lives in it and feels access to land and has access to land. So thank you. Cool. I'm Miriam. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a first in many generations white, queer, Ashkenazi, Jewish vegetable farmer. And I spent most of my life in Western Massachusetts, where I now live. And I farmed in many different capacities over the past 10 years in places like rural Pennsylvania, suburban Long Island, the desert of Israel-Palestine, and Upper Valley, Western Massachusetts, where I most recently have been farming. So in that time also, I have wrestled deeply with what it can mean to be a Jewish person in and out of diaspora, living on stolen land, and engaged in land work in ways many of my most recent ancestors have not. So that's where I'm coming from. I'm also a community member of the Jewish Farmer Network, which is a farmer-founded nonprofit that connects Jewish agrarians to each other and to the ancient ancestral agricultural wisdom of the Jewish tradition. So I'm
Miriam?
Yeah.
I'm just going to jump in for 1 second. It's a little hard for me to hear you through the Zoom. Sometimes you speak loud enough and sometimes you don't. So if you want to just sort of project a little bit more, that would be great. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Yeah, awesome. That's really helpful. Cool. Well, I'll say the last part again, which is that I'm a community member of the Jewish Farmer Network. I'm here on behalf of that organization, and it's a nonprofit, farmer-founded, that connects Jewish agrarians to each other and to the ancient ancestral agricultural wisdom of the Jewish tradition. That more audible?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, awesome. So I would love to get a sense of like who this intimate group of people are. And if we could just do like a show of hands, it'll be very fast. Also on Zoom, if you want to show your hand, we can see you on the Zoom screen. Yeah, could you, if you feel comfortable, raise your hand if you are a farm worker. Amazing. Raise your hand if you're a farm owner or manage a team of farm workers. Great. Raise your hand if you're a Christian, were raised Christian, or default to Christianity in the absence of another culture or tradition. Okay, and raise your hand if you're of another religious or cultural background. Amazing.
I don't.
You count. You get to raise your hand.
I wouldn't know much. Like I guess
Yeah.
spirituality counts.
Totally, of course. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm really glad you both are here, and that Zoom folks are here too. This is the part that we get to be really cozy and talk about together as a group.
Yeah.
Cool. So I guess if we just want to talk, and Mark, don't feel pressure to participate. You're doing it.
Of course.
You're working in a capacity, but if you want to, we are so here for it. Why did you come to this subject? You want to start?
Sure, I'll start. My name's Danielle. I am, I guess now a second-year farmer and grower. And I was raised Roman Catholic. I'm sharing this because the context of, I was raised Roman Catholic, but from a very young age, I considered myself a non-believer. And in the past, I would say 5 years or so, I have developed an independent, very deep interest in studying religion. And I'm especially very interested in Judaism. I am reading the Torah right now. I'm very excited for today's portion, which I haven't gotten to. And I came today because I'm really curious about this question from a number of different angles. Like, I'm really interested in ways, like I work on Saturdays on the farm. And although I'm not Jewish, I haven't converted to Judaism, I've always wanted to, or I've recently been really interested in having like a Sabbath observation. And so I've been asking myself the question of like, what does that look like if I work on Saturdays? So I've been thinking a lot about the Sabbath. I have a lot of like general curiosity. I even have questions that we may not get to, like about agricultural Sabbath. And since you farmed in Israel Palestine, I wonder what later on we can get into that. But obviously land and the people who live on it are totally tied into this spiritual question. So I'm here because this is what I was most looking forward to the session. And I wish there were more people here for the richness of conversation, but I'm just like so grateful that you are taking the time to lead the session. So
thanks so much for sharing, Danielle. It's really powerful to hear your story. And yeah, super, all the questions, here for it.
Cool.
That's what it's about. Anyone else want to share? No pressure from Zoom.
I came to a session because I was asked to help, and two, I could probably learn a piece of information that could change my life and that could apply to me. Maybe that I'm having trouble in some aspect of my life. So who knows if I could go home with like a piece of information that I never knew.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. If there's anyone on Zoom that wants to jump in, feel free. You could raise your hand or turn on your camera. I'll just pause for a moment.
Yeah, right now it's just me on Zoom, even though I'm here twice. This is
I
Jocelyn.
understand now, Jocelyn. Thank you. I was like, who's the other person? Brilliant. Well, you're totally welcome to share too if you'd like.
Yeah, thank you. You know, I just felt like this would give me some background as the executive director of NOFA Mass. I'm always trying to learn more about how we can be a more inclusive organization, and I thought I could learn from you here.
Cool. Well, this is really sweet. I'm really glad all three of you are here, and let's do it.
yeah.
So I'll just give a little bit of a roadmap for what we're going to talk about. We've got context for where this workshop is coming from, how it came about. I'm going to offer a new framework for what it means to think about religious diversity in our agricultural context. We're going to talk a little bit about workers' rights, best practices as workers and managers, and then the bigger meta question of like, why does this matter? So the most important thing I think to say from the get-go is to name where I'm coming from, where the Jewish Farmer Network is coming from. this workshop is really a case study in very much from a Jewish perspective, which may or may not feel resonant to any non-Christians in the agricultural world. And so when we're thinking about like how this might apply to someone's experience who isn't Jewish, I'm so excited to like dive into those conversations about experiences you're like, oh yeah, that really resonates with me. You're like, oh, that part of this presentation is like really about Judaism and not so much about my religious experience. So I just feel it's important to say like, this is where I'm coming from, and I'm so ready to engage with other religious experiences, religious diversity experiences. But this is kind of our case study in making an argument that we think is really relevant to everybody of non-Christian background. Yeah, and it's really, I guess I sort of said this, but in service of the larger goal of healthy religious and cultural diversity. And right, all of these examples will be about things like the Sabbath, the Jewish Shabbat, or agricultural cycles within the context of Judaism. But there are so many ways that I really hope that this framework can feel resonant to non-Jews in a farming way. So I want to give you guys a little bit of background about who I am. Whoops. Cool. So ever since I began farming, my Jewishness has felt really front and center as both a gift, granting me access into ancient ways of land care and practice, and also as a challenge. My baby, or my grandfather, used to tell me, I've never met a Jewish farmer before. Oh, I'm getting like choked up about this. Did not expect that. Well, yeah. He would say to me like, I've never met a Jewish farmer before you. And I really interpreted that with pride. I get to be the person in my family to remind, whoa, I'll take a real second. To remind my diaspora family of its land-based ancestry. And that's a huge gift. And it also makes me feel cautious. I felt anxious about highlighting my otherness when advocating for time off for religious observance. I felt frustrated by the de facto belief that Saturdays are for all of the chores you didn't get to on the farm earlier in the week, and that Sundays are the days for resting, since the Jewish practice of the Sabbath or Shabbat is from Friday night to Saturday evening. And I felt really tired of trying to maintain my own sense of spiritual practice amidst a broader culture that's not really interested in where I'm coming from. So why does this have to do with the workshop? Basically, the Jewish Farmer Network participated in some listening sessions with the USDA's Farm and Ranch Stress Assistance Network Northeast Jewish Farmer Listening Session. That's a really big way to say. The Jewish Farmer Network got to host a bunch of Jewish farmers from our region in listening sessions around what it means to be a Jewish farmer, important issues, challenges, and future visions for this group of folks. And a lot of wisdom was gleaned in that process, and that's really the foundation of the content of this workshop. So I want to read this quote from the listening session aloud. Anybody?
Oh, you want me to read it?
Bring it on.
All right, so my spiritual practice is important. I am an observant Jew. I want to be able to have opportunities to celebrate holidays, to observe Shabbat, if I'm saying that correct, to be a participating Jewish person in my life. And that is not something that do I read that part? No,
you can skip that part.
That most of the outside agriculture community embraces, supports, agrees with, and they absolutely do question your commitment to your land, your farm, your craft, your business. But if it's Christmas or Easter, don't worry about it.
Yeah. So that's a direct quote from a participant. A lot of what was shared in the interviews from where that quote came is what influenced this workshop, as well as the worker resource zine that we created earlier this year, which I'll have a copy of, called Shovels and Shofars, the Jewish Farm Workers Guide to Self-Advocacy. And it's a resource to support farm workers to get time off for Jewish holidays and support their Jewish practice on the farm And y'all should totally take a look over the course of the session. I'm actually selling them, but I would be super down to just give them to you if you don't know. But like also, it's a resource. We want people to have it. Yeah. So yeah. Here's another quote that is really going to ground us in the next while. Danielle, would you be down to read this one?
Totally. The way that the farming culture works is an implicit and constant assessment of, are you really here? Are you really part of the team? And I think that observing Jewish holidays in a Christian hegemonic paradigm has caused people to misunderstand or misinterpret what my commitment level is.
Yeah. So this is a quote actually from a friend of mine, and is really going to guide us in our next question. 81% of respondents to a totally informal Instagram survey, not scientific, but still meaningful number, answered that yes, they did have trouble getting time off for the Jewish holidays. Reference point for folks maybe who are unfamiliar, there are a lot of Jewish holidays. In certain religious practices, there are maybe 1 or 2 or 3. Christianity, right, has the big ones that we know about. There's Christmas, there's Easter. Judaism has a lot of holidays. So you'll see this as a recurring theme for something that Barbara such as myself really consider an important touchstone of their religious experience. So that's just a sort of explanatory comma for why that's coming up so much right now. Okay. Sorry, I'm going to offer a new framework. This may or may not feel new to you all, but I want to frame it. I want to call it a new framework because I think it has the power to really shift the way that Jewish farmers and all farmers and all people can really understand sort of what's going on here as we talk about, as we read these quotes from Jewish farmers talking about their farming experience, like what's actually happening. We're going to use the framework of hegemony, which sometimes I pronounce hegemony, sometimes I call it hegemony. I think they're both correct. We're going to use this framework, and specifically, we're going to use the framework of Christian hegemony to get at why it can be so challenging for non-Christian folks to authentically practice their religious needs within a farming context. Anyone want to read this lovely definition coined by Italian philosopher Antonio Gramsci?
I got you.
Heck yeah.
Hegemony, that's how you pronounce it?
Yes.
Refers to the dominance of a particular way of thinking or ideology. See, I learned a new word today.
Heck yeah. Thank you guys so much for reading. So hegemony often looks like social norms that are invisibilized or taken for granted because we take them as normal. This is really important to keep in mind. One way that I like to think about hegemony is like it's so normal in the dominant system that you don't even know it's there unless you are personally affected by it. One quote that a friend of mine was relating to me when thinking about how hegemony works is the idea of fish swimming in water, right? And they come across an older fish, and the older fish says, like, "Good morning, how's the water treating you?" And the young fish swim away, and one looks at the other and says, "What the heck is water?" Like, it's the idea that like the stuff we're all in is shaping us actively, when some folks, often the ones who benefit from the hegemonic system, don't even know it's there. And this might be really familiar to you when you're thinking about systemic racism, when you're thinking about white supremacy, when you're thinking about colonialism. Capitalism, it intertwines itself. Hegemony is a word to describe systems of control, right? And so it might be ringing some bells. Christian hegemony specifically is talking about how Christianity works. It's a pervasive and systemic set of Christian values, beliefs, individuals, and institutions that dominate all aspects of our society through the social, political, economic, legal, and cultural powers they wield. And this is from Paul Kibble, who's a scholar on this topic from Living in the Shadow of the Cross. So we're going to talk about Christian hegemony to understand, like, what's the deal here? Why is it so challenging? Why can it be so challenging to be a non-Christian farmer? Okay, with that context in mind, who can give an example to me of crap I should enjoy? Everyday examples of how Christian hegemony works.
I mean, I guess it's kind of cheating because it was the first bullet.
Oh my God, I love
It's the big, that's the most water that I can think of. I mean, aside from like BCE AD, just the Roman calendar in general.
Totally.
And then, yeah, I would say the Roman calendar and normalizing that, which unto itself, I think, takes us away from the land. But that's a whole totally different part. But that is what comes.
Totally. Can you think of like other examples, maybe connected to the calendar, that kind of have this similar water quality of like it's so normal we don't even pay attention?
I definitely think you raised a strong point about Sundays being the day where it's like, oh, it's like you like Sunday's the day to catch up. Sunday is the Sabbath was always in my mind, and it wasn't until more recently that I came to learn that like the Jewish Sabbath, a day that's like actually really observed in a very through a strong set of rituals, like happens on totally different things. So I think that even the way the week is structured.
Yep, absolutely.
Frankly, even the weekend, and when we think of the amount of preparation that has to go into observing the Sabbath, like Friday night, like if people are stuck working late, things like this, it just like starts to really interfere.
Totally, you are so on it. Those are the exact examples that I was going to offer. The calendar, the days of the week. It's on currency, right? We talk about the Christian God in the Pledge of Allegiance, the national anthem. We have Christmas as a federally observed holiday. Passover is not a federally observed holiday. Ramadan, not a federally observed holiday. Like, I couldn't even imagine what that would feel like were those to be the case. So we'll get into that. But those are some common examples. And before we go too much deeper, it feels really important to say this next thing, which is that thinking about the impact of Christian hegemony does not include critiquing individual Christians or their beliefs. One is a power structure and one is a religious system. They're not the same. And we don't want to confuse the two. And Christian hegemony impacts non-Christians of any or no religion. People who Christianity was forcefully put onto through colonization. People raised Christian and who left Christianity, Christians themselves, and then my friends maybe include Christian Bale. Because that's my friends. Cool. So it affects everybody. But what about at work in the context of our farm lives? Oh wait, hang on. I totally forgot that. Have you ever heard of Christian hegemony? Is this new to you? In what context have you heard of it? Have you experienced it or perpetuated it before? Talk to me. What do you got?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've perpetuated it unwittingly my whole life by just like assuming that that was the way things work. And part of it is like when I think of the water analogy, I think of this is water by David Foster.
That's exactly what
and I think that the point is well made, which is that like things are really only problematic insofar as like we don't recognize its structure. Right. Like you may assess the structure and then say that works for me, but the fact that like we don't even stop to think a lot of these so-called American values are like really Christian values, and like if there's not necessarily anything wrong with it if you know it's there and you choose it. But yeah, I wonder a lot like what it would look like if other religious traditions were given that same like space.
Yeah.
And also I think it is like a value set, and people deserve the chance to decide whether.
Totally. That's really helpful. Yep. Yeah. All of us living in our society actually like are coerced into agreeing with the social norm of Christian hegemony or white supremacy or whatever oppressive system we're analyzing, right? Because we're punished by teachers, by police, by government, etc., for not conforming to that norm, but we're also consenting to it. We're also participating in those norms by acting them out and perpetuating them, right? Like every time I choose to, what's a good example? Like there are many ways that non-Christians can uphold and uplift Christian hegemony, actually without knowing it, just like Christians can, and that's important. Okay, now we can talk about this one. Unless there are other things we want to add to the definition, or questions we might have for things that aren't coming. Okay. All right, let's talk about work.
By the way, forgive me if you see me nodding off. I've been up since 4:30.
Oh my
in the
gosh.
morning.
And you are just like sweeping in as a willing participant. So I do not, you are under
Like,
no
I
pressure.
don't want it to like seem disrespectful. I've
Oh
been
my
nodding
God.
off since like the earliest class.
And like, put your head, whatever you need to do. We don't have Zoom questions. Take care of yourself. Don't hesitate. Okay. So at work and in general, employers need to make reasonable accommodations for their employees that don't impose undue hardship upon the employer. That's just general labor guidelines, right? However, that's what's up. The law is very state by state. You might have to use vacation days, sick time, or unpaid leave to take off for holidays or meet other religious needs you might have. And most significantly, at least from my own experience, and I suspect for others, if there are under 15 people on staff, your employer doesn't have to give you the aforementioned reasonable accommodations. So for many agricultural contexts, this is actually a really important point, legally speaking. And I just want to offer some examples of like what Christian hegemony might look like or feel like, given this set of laws, given this set of laws. It might feel like feeling shame or guilt, being guilted into working on culturally significant holidays. It can look like upholding a quote unquote Protestant work ethic, which doesn't prioritize rest for people, land, or animals. It might look like moments where being a good worker means you're indirectly pressured and or explicitly told to sacrifice your own personal practices for the benefit of your employer. And it also can mean having your commitment to the farm questioned because you've asked for time off or time to practice a culturally significant holiday or otherwise. This is another moment to share. I'm really curious if folks in this space have experienced or witnessed tension between your own workplace norms and the religious or cultural practices of you or someone else and your employer. I know, for example, oh, go ahead.
Oh, that
Oh,
was.
I'll just,
Oh, go ahead.
Jocelyn, go ahead.
Yeah.
no, I'll defer to the people in the room first and I'll jump in second.
Really? Do you have a thought?
No,
Alright,
go for it.
So what this is asking is like, have like religious practices been a problem in the workplace?
Yeah. Or have you seen or felt like stress or tension between religious practice or cultural ones? They don't have to be explicitly about religion.
Like I would say like, where when me and another person talk ourselves, it's just like, oh no, this is that, and then I'm just like, oh, but I'm just like, oh, we're just having a conversation. This is not a debate, and it's like, oh no, but you're wrong. This is that. I'll just be like, okay, I just gotta just like cut off the conversation because I notice like over like conversations like that, they could build a lot of tension. So that's why I don't really like to exchange words with, and when I say exchange words, like like have a conversation about it, because people tend to like start feeling themselves on what they feel is right. So that's why I just like it just I'm gonna just stay quiet.
So it's like a space where you don't feel like you can express your opinion sometimes.
No, yeah, so that's why I don't even speak about it.
Yeah.
Like a lot, majority of the time I don't.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense and can be really uncomfortable and painful. I'm sorry that you experienced that.
No, it's okay.
Yeah.
Something, I guess two things come up to me. One is just the fact that I like realized like, oh my goodness, I had like a moment of disappointment of like, it would be so nice to be able to start incorporating some of these practices into my life. Oh, well, I can't do it this year because I work on Saturdays this year. And how like, I don't like, because right now for me, like it's like a choice for me. It's not a religion or a tradition that I was raised in. And so even though I was disappointed, I was like, next year, maybe I'll choose a different day to have that kind of tradition. But that's not a comfortable choice for people who actually like observe the religion I've learned and the tradition. But one of my dear friends was raised Orthodox and is still observant, and she's a teacher. And interestingly, there's a lot of comparisons to be made between teachers and farmers, the seasonal nature of the work, the expectations, the workload. And her principal had actually called her into the office to say, All right, Aubrey. I recognize some of these holidays, but you're just gonna have to explain the other ones. And she was so gracious, even in relaying the story to me, where she was explaining how she felt like a little nerdy, being like, "Oh, Shabbat," but she was like, it was just so painful and frustrating that like she would, and she had also had to deal with some like feedback from her higher ups because they accused her of taking off too much time, and it's just pain. That sounds really painful. And so that's I have not experienced it myself. I have the privilege of not being, I haven't been observant in any religion, but seeing someone that I really love experience it kind of hard.
Totally. Yep. Right. Having commitment to your job, like being asked to do labor because you are of a marginalized identity, and so therefore like need to prove yourself. Yeah, those are really painful experiences, and depending on the power structures, can be really scary for that person's job stability. Yeah, I really. Oh, Jocelyn, jump in.
Yeah, I just want to jump in. We have a new-ish policy where folks can choose to either take the sort of regular federal holidays off, or they can have their own, holidays of their choice, which feels like a step in the right direction. But the problem is there that it's not a one-for-one equivalent between, like, some of those federal holidays may be Christian holidays or something, but like even if you don't celebrate President's Day, your kids might be home on President's Day, so you really might need to take President's Day off, and you don't necessarily want to exchange that for one of your religious holidays because you still have to, deal with the logistics of kids home from school or something like that. So it's like it's still problematic, even though it feels like we're trying to be inclusive. It ends up being sort of not totally helpful. So I'm just realizing that this needs to be, something we talk about further.
Yeah, I super appreciate that. We're gonna get to like strategies that workers and employers can utilize, but I think a floating holiday is something that can be a creative solution, but it ultimately, like we're still working within a larger culture that that is gonna shut school on President's Day or on Christmas or what have you. And so even if you yourself aren't practicing, you're embedded within a system that requires you to acknowledge it to a certain degree, and it might function as a holiday even if you didn't want it to. So yeah, thanks for adding that. Did you have something else?
I had one more thought.
Yeah.
Was like a fasting, an extended holiday like Ramadan, where there's fasting. Just accommodate. I even think about students in school and wondering, how culturally sensitive are the schools, and what are the expectations around students who may have a lower energy level, let alone a farmer.
Yeah.
I mean, to fast and to be expected to do intense farm labor is cruel and also not sustainable. So I had never thought of that until now. So thank you for bringing this up.
Totally, yeah, it's a really good example. Yeah, as someone who's not Muslim myself, I've actually been really curious through the years in negotiating my own religious practice, how folks who observe Ramadan are able to navigate that in a farming context, and would love to gain insight into if anyone has anything to share about that particular question. I think it's really important and complicated.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, y'all. So as we just talked about, as we are kind of working towards, we're really inviting managers to go above the bare minimum and create supportive workplaces, right? And like, you could say that all day, but like, what does that mean in practice? So we're gonna try to get a little bit into like what that can look like person to person, and to sort of to rise to the occasion of really making a workspace that feels fully accessible for different religious needs. So best practices, fun gifts. And these are ones that I and my coworkers and other folks in the Jewish Farmer Network have come up with ourselves. I am really eager to hear about other solutions and ideas that this group of folks have, but I want to offer some places to begin. The first thing to remember that I think is huge, really big deal. Everyone's religious and cultural practices look different and can change over time. And this one can be hard to wrap your head around if you don't know a lot of folks of religions or cultures that are different than yours. So if someone wants to read this quote, I think it's really useful.
Okay.
Thanks, Mark.
I definitely gotta look when I put, how do I pronounce that? Yom
Yom
Kippur.
Kippur.
Yom Kippur.
You got it.
Kippur. Is that how it's pronounced?
Yeah.
On calendar, as if because I wasn't talking openly or frequently, because I can't see.
Yeah, and free. Yeah.
And frequently about my Judaism. It was some kind of surprise that I wanted to take Yom Kippur off.
Yeah. So this is a huge thing that I have had so many conversations about with coworkers. Yom Kippur is arguably the most holy day of the Jewish year. It's a day of atonement, reflection, fasting, and a lot of Jews that I know, especially who don't look outwardly observant, maybe they're not wearing a head covering and a kippah, or they're not wearing tzitzit, they're not wearing prayer fringes. If they don't look Jewish enough, there's suspicion around their desire to practice, and that is really rough. You don't look Jewish enough. You can apply that phrase right to so many different categories of being, in every way, every application is painful, right? Like, you're not queer enough, you're not Black enough, you're not feminine, like every way that we might question a person's identity, experience, or observance is hard, it's painful. So I really want to encourage folks to trust, right? To trust another person's needs and experience when they express them to you, and when they are putting trust in you to ask for what they need. Another reminder that is very connected is about not policing people's practices, right? Even if someone doesn't present as religious in your eyes, or chooses to observe some holidays and not others, or observes in ways you don't understand, it's still a religious practice. And this one is sensitive, right? Like, some years, I will be real, some years I'm like, I need to practice, I need to observe Yom Kippur. Like, this is gonna ground me for the year ahead. I need to do this. Some years I don't feel that way. And the inconsistency can be confusing for another person. But just like we talk about other ways in which we are trying to take the police out of our minds, right? We're not here to police other people's practices either. Okay, so here's some tips for farm workers, for folks who are needing to take on the position of advocating for themselves in a work environment. And this one I feel really strongly about. Take yourself seriously. If it's the year that you need to practice Yom Kippur, it's the year you need to practice Yom Kippur. You get to choose. Your religious and cultural identity, heritage, preference, needs, those are real. And taking yourself seriously is the first way you can, where the integrity is going to start, right? Like, if you take yourself seriously, you enable other people to do something. Really easy one, or not easy, but self-explanatory maybe, communicating needs and boundaries as early as possible. This can be hard depending on your relationship with your boss, but it's so helpful to say what you need and what you can and can't do as quickly as you can, as soon as you know, to give that the farmer who you have plenty of empathy for, because farming is freaking hard, as much of a chance to accommodate your needs as it can. Yeah, be really clear about days and times. Use the crew calendar. Email your boss. Don't just tell them. Like, get it in writing. That's just so helpful. Offer solutions where all sides are taken care of. You know, like, as farm workers, as someone who's worked for many people in the past decade, I care a lot about my employers. I care a lot about the success of their farm, of our collective project. So there's a high incentive, right, that like everybody's needs get met. And coming at it from that angle can be really grounding, especially when you feel like already apprehensive or maybe even defensive about your own needs. It's about like all sides. And then last, your farm manager might need help understanding what exactly you're asking, like your friends needing to explain to the principal. And this is a complicated area, right? Like, a lot of folks with holding marginalized identities feel really strongly like, I'm not here to educate, and other folks feel open to that. Find your own path, do what feels authentic, but it may really well be that you need to send your employer a few links, like, hey, this is what this holiday is about. This is why I can't eat. This is why I can't use the field. It wouldn't be, you know, like, sometimes, unfortunately, in a Christian hegemonic system, we're required to take that Does anyone have other ideas for ways that farm managers or farm workers can advocate for themselves? No question.
No, I'm just reflecting because I think these are such great steps to take. And I think, I'm sure we'll get into this when it comes to the employer, because especially like if the hegemony is the power structure that within a workplace is also a power structure, even though it may be a more innocuous power structure, maybe a regulation of the law. But what's interesting to me about the conversation is that like your relationship with religion, your creator, your believer, like that is something that goes so far beyond like what a lot of like even socially in general what we often feel comfortable talking about.
Totally.
And it's just it's so much for people to have to carry. But I think these are such strong ways to like lead, and I'm excited to see what ideas you have for employers too. But it's intense.
Yeah, totally.
This is good though.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it feels really good. In the past number of years, I've never actually like been methodical about advocating for myself in all of these ways, and it feels really good to actually just like have a list. I
Yeah.
currently work for a Jewish farm, and so this list is actually really different. But in the past, I think this would have been really supportive to me, and just also knowing that I wasn't alone in that process, in that navigating process. I want to offer an example that I really like from the executive director of the Jewish Farm Network. Shani made this diagram. It's called her list of do's and don'ts. And it's an example for how she frames setting boundaries for your own practice. So as we talked about, within Judaism, there's the practice of Shabbat. It's a weekly day of rest. There are many guidelines and commandments for things you are and aren't allowed to do. Different people interpret those commandments in different ways. And the way that Shani chose to break up, to create a system that would be legible to her employer, but also meaningful to her own spiritual practice, was dividing labor into two categories: farm care and farm work. So things she felt comfortable doing on the farm that she got to express to her employer. She would open and close high tunnel sidewalls, keeping things alive, right? Maintenance. She would turn off irrigation and turn the irrigation on and off. She would water seedlings, again, maintaining life, keeping it going. And she would do daily animal care, feeding, watering, moving new pasture, milking, emergency animal care, things to keep everything alive, right? What she chose not to do was like active work, building or repairing infrastructure, intensive livestock tasks like trimming hooves, processing, slaughter, selling, working markets, or handling money. That's something that's very specific to the practice of Shabbat that she wanted to preserve. And she felt a boundary around not harvesting, weeding, mowing, pruning, or otherwise interfering with plants. So this was sort of a way for her to understand what she felt good about doing, what she didn't. And she could offer this as a solution to her strong desire and need to practice Shabbat to her. For managers, this came out very quickly. These are some ideas for managers. We talked about this. Jocelyn brought up awesome floating holidays. My prior workplace instituted that this past year. It was really helpful for me personally. Proactively going over the calendar needs in the spring. This might seem like a silly one, but it feels powerful when a boss asks their crew, "This is the calendar. What do you need from it?" To center the farm workers' experience and needs ahead of time before the craziness of summer happens. Okay, I know that Passover's coming. I know you're going to need at least 2 days off for that. Okay, we talked about that in March. We're good. I know Rosh Hashanah is coming in September. I know you're going to need 2 days off. It's unfortunately the weekend of our really big sales opportunity. I need you. Like having that conversation ahead of time goes a really long way. Asking or doing your own research. Diversity, as we know, human diversity of experience and existence is gorgeous, and getting the opportunity and the invitation to do your own research use that opportunity as a place for your own learning. Wikipedia is also really awesome. Please don't question a worker's commitment to the farm. This one, they know can be fraught. Farms run on such small budgets with such little capacity for breathing room in the heat of the moment. But it's really important to not correlate a worker's needs around their religious practice with their commitment to the project as a whole. And this one I can't say enough. Just like in the worker side of things, work to come to a mutually consistent agreement. Hopefully you've hired someone that you trust and care about, and really everybody wins when you get to be creative together. Again, see religious variety on your staff as a strength. I heard a cool example of a crew in which there was an observant Shabbat practitioner, there was an observant Christian Sabbath practitioner, they swapped shifts. Like, there are ways to be creative about with religious variety and use it really to your advantage as a manager. And then this one is like a given for farm managers, and I know that it's really hard to do, especially on a small scale. But the more you can remember that to do it, the better off your crew are. Build redundancy into systems and into training. So if your one milker needs to take off for a holiday, the cows will still be milked, right? Like, other people will hold the skills that need to be held in order to get the tasks done, even when the one person who usually does it isn't there. That one's just really, really helpful and will benefit you in other ways too, not just in that religious source. And last, take this opportunity to reflect on how you perpetuate Christian identity and also how you've been harmed by it. This is a really good chance to think about your own experience and learn. Get to expand your sense of what even life can be. Next, we're going to talk about.
I'm gonna try to splash cold water in my face because
Go
it's
for
just
it.
like.
Take care of yourself.
I'm so sorry.
Don't apologize.
I just wanted to say too.
Yeah, please.
I'm so sorry.
Oh my gosh,
Interrupting left and right.
No, this is what we're here for.
That was a beautiful slide, and I think the point about like seeing it as a strength, not just for the opportunity for creative problem solving, but like when someone is spiritually fulfilled and is able to like show up in their life in the way that feels right to them, like they're gonna show up at work, they're gonna show up everywhere else so much more energized. And I also think like this notion of reconciling like Jewish religious tradition with a productive farm is also something that happens in other parts of the world, where Christian hegemony is not like the superseding power. So like, not to say that like everyone who runs a farm, who has employees who, you know, have different religious observances need to like look to those examples, but that like it is done, and yes, that's something worth considering. Like, how is it done? And like just being open to the fact like there's a way forward. But the commitment thing was such a good one too. Like it's just not right for me.
Totally. Yeah, and I think like the thing to remember, like something that's really grounding for me, like to make full circle, right? But like I have so much empathy and care for small scale farmers. Like this is not about making the lives of managers and farm owners harder. It's about making them more resilient and robust and diverse and engaged and like present to the human experience. So like that feels front and center too, right? Like this is not about like we want to be better workers, we want to be better managers, like for the sake of the project. Yeah, and that feels really important to return to when we think about why. Cool. And then the last part is about allies for coworkers. There's all sorts of really cool ways to show up for religious diversity in your workplace. The first one is just don't shame people's practices and don't shame them for taking time off. I actually really like this suggestion in general. Like we get to choose to not shame each other for time taken off, not just for religious diversity needs, for religious observance, but for any reason that a person might need to take time off. Self-care, family emergencies, any reason, right? Like we're not here to shame each other. So that one's good in all realms. Have curiosity and care, right? Like we get to have curiosity about our own religious and cultural backgrounds and practices, and of our coworkers. Again, it's an opportunity. Offering to swap shifts may or may not be the most powerful thing you can do. A loving coworker who's able to work on a day that I am not is the biggest gift. It's a show of solidarity. It's a show of love. It seems really small, but it's actually really not. So yeah, I think if nothing else, telling your coworker that you care about them, that you want them to have a good fast or a good holiday or a good day of reflection, take their shift. And they'll take yours when you need it. Okay, we're gonna head to the biggest of questions. Why does this all matter? And you know, you were like spot on, totally called it. For many of us, the ability to connect to our ancestral and communal rhythms supports our holistic well-being. If you need to think about it in the context of a happy worker, of a happy employee is a good worker, that's okay too, right? Like when your people have needs that are met, they're better workers, they're better people. When everyone thrives in their own religious, traditional, and cultural practices freely and authentically, this is ultimately a good thing for the land, the food we grow and share, workplace dynamics, our communities, and all of us. Resisting Christian hegemony moves us closer to collective liberation, the freedom of all people, all land, as it requires that everyone is able to thrive and practice and be freely and authentically. When there are so many barriers to inclusion in the farm workplace that keep our farms small and accessible for so many different people for so many different reasons, the ways that we've talked about move us toward a more embracing workplace and ultimately actually like a better world. And it's one way to get at that. Yeah. So now we just get to do some reflecting about what we've learned, reflected on for the first time, what you're still wondering, and maybe most interestingly, what are some steps or commitments you're leaving with, or sitting with, or maybe still brewing, but haven't come out yet, but are still brewing that you want to implement in the season to come. Yeah, we could totally take this time to just chat.
Yeah. I mean, I want to thank you. When I was looking at the schedule last night, I was like, well, I know exactly what I'm doing at 2:30. Like, this
Awesome.
is 100%. And then I thought, whoever's leading this is also making a compromise because it is Saturday. And I like said to my boyfriend, like, that is so interesting. Like,
You didn't even say that. Well
rich
said.
conversation. And so I just want to thank you
Yeah.
for that. And you know, like, it's such a deep topic. And I wish, again, just for the sake of like more people here, but there were more people here, but I'm glad it's being recorded. I think like certainly thinking more deeply and having like a word for the Christian hegemony is very helpful.
Awesome.
I have written down here that like as I continue to develop my own religious practice, my own relationship with a higher power, for now, while it would just be like a nice to have to be able to observe the Sabbath, like anyone I know at work, whoever needs to have that day off, I'll work it. That would be a strong way to like not just embody it, but to be an ally. So that's a great recommendation. But it just brings up for me that like we live in a society that's like, you know, supposedly founded on religious freedom.
Right.
And we also live in a society where supposedly there's this pillar of separation of church and state. And as with many of these things we take for granted, it's like a lot more amount than that. And I just hope more people have that curious compassion, not necessarily to like part ways with their own beliefs, but to open their minds to other people's right to have like a very rich spiritual life. So this was really, really interesting. And then like, I don't know, I'd be curious if Jocelyn has anything to say.
Yeah.
And then I have like questions if you're open to
Yeah.
them.
I mean, we have tons of time, and like I really appreciate what you're sharing. And I also like would love to like get at with you some of the like, I mean, yeah, something I want to ask you more about is like how you can take yourself seriously and your own spiritual longing and your own, like, I think that like each person's entitlement to their own connection, like, is something that, like, in this, because it's us, like, we get to talk about that if that is meaningful. And it feels really important to me, right, that like there are right, that we get to tell ourselves that what we're doing is legitimate and important and worthy within the context of our systems.
Yeah, and I mean, like, you had the slide about being mindful of the fact that people's religious experiences or relationship with religion can change. It can shift in a single day. I mean, if you have a hard day. But I've been very surprised. I've been very surprised with myself in the last year and making space to change. And it's totally about taking yourself seriously and building it in. I think, like, gosh, again, like right now for me, it's like this more tenuous thing where, like, I would not, I'm trying to take myself seriously, but I would be too nervous to ask others to take me seriously.
Yeah.
And it just shows me how powerful and like difficult it is to have to advocate for yourself. I don't know if you've listened. I'm only talking like this because, like, it's awesome.
Oh my God, please.
Jocelyn, please interrupt if you have anything to say. I can really talk.
Go for it. I'll chime in later.
Okay, I just wanted to note that you might have listened to it already, a beautiful Ezra Klein podcast episode that just came out about the Sabbath. Have you listened?
No, cool.
He has a woman on whose name I can't remember, but they talk about Abraham Joshua Heschel, but they also talk about a book that this woman wrote, and she gets into what it takes to observe the Sabbath when you live in a community where your values aren't necessarily widely shared.
Yeah.
And they're talking a lot in terms of like how much preparation it takes. You need community preparation. But one thing she mentions is like how hard it is, like if you're a business owner in a community that you're like maybe the only person who's closing on Saturday. What does that mean for you economically? And I feel like there's like an interesting parallel with the conversation we're having. So I just recommend you find it.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, like, we could talk for a long time about Shabbat and like how it radicalized, like how it's a radical reframing of like capitalism. We don't have to, but like there's so much in there about like, what does it mean to be the only one in a space where like that's not what's happening. Yeah, totally.
I want to make this possible.
Yeah, Jocelyn, have at it. I mean, feel free, and it's just us now, so whatever feels good to you.
Yeah, thanks. No, I mean, one thing that I have been reflecting on throughout this workshop is just, this is the first time that I have been in a workshop specifically on this topic, but it feels like the themes are very familiar to me in terms of sort of what would be a good thing to do if you're trying to support, diversity, equity, and inclusion from a point of view of race or gender or, that type of thing. Or, labor issues, or, all of it is like, it's just very integrated and intertwined. And so that has stood out to me as something that's significant. And not to say that there aren't unique aspects of, supporting people's religious lives, but it's very much intertwined, I think.
Yes, that's awesome. That's like mission accomplished, right? It's like, the goal is not to say that like these oppressive systems are unique and don't, like, the goal is to really get folks to understand and like feel how deeply intertwined these systems are. And like when we poke out one and we pull one thread, like ultimately like stuff falls apart, right? Like it's actually a powerful thing to realize how intertwined they are, because it also means that like when we get out one facet, we're getting at all of it. And I actually find that really hopeful and really exciting, right? That like these ways of thinking can be applied towards racial inclusion, gender inclusion, like all of these incredibly important facets of what it means to be in a diverse agriculture space. So I'm really glad. Yeah. Cool.
So that's one takeaway. And I think the other thing is, as we've been in, some ongoing conversations specifically around racial equity over the past year, one of the themes, the theme of our summer conference was around sort of decolonizing the food system. And then we did a series of workshops this fall about sort of looking at things from a capitalist point of view versus an indigenous point of view, sort of. And that sort of colonialist capitalist viewpoint, I think, is, or like perspective of, what really questioning why are we doing these things, and is it because of, you know, just these habits that we're in because of capitalism, et cetera, is really applicable here. And just thinking about, like, you know, the panic of worrying about what would happen if people, you know, didn't work in, you know, at certain points in time for whatever reason, it's like very much part of the capitalist system. So I feel like that lens of sort of decolonizing, et cetera, is really useful here as well.
Cool. I'm just gonna shift it so that you can also see Danielle and like can be more of a
cool.
circle.
Oh, there we go, almost.
Amazing.
Can you shift just slightly? Sorry.
Oh yeah.
I'm seeing Danielle's back.
Oh, wait, am I, okay.
There we go. Hey.
Awesome. Hi, Jocelyn.
Yeah. Now we're in a conversation.
I hope, I wonder if you had any experience when you were farming in Israel and Palestine with this agricultural Sabbath. Is that something, because, you know, it's one conversation to talk about if people having to take time off, but it would be like a culture shock. I mean, I can't even imagine in America a production farmer being like, all right, this year the land is fallow.
Yeah.
And I wasn't sure if that is even practice that still happens. And are you comfortable speaking to that?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm very curious.
Totally. Yeah. It's like, I actually think it's one of the most accessible things to talk. Like when we talk about ancient wisdom, the tagline of Jewish Farmer was like ancient wisdom, modern farmer, which I think is really apt. There's a lot of ancient wisdom that, like, without that much pulling and stretching, like directly applies to the stuff that modern farmers are up against. And the concept of agricultural Sabbath or Shemitah is like, with my farmer hat on, it's like, oh yeah, that's crop rotation. That's leaving a field fallow for a year, right? Like, and there are, what I can't do is speak that much to like, really like incredibly like law-abiding, incredibly traditional Jewish practice in Israel. What I can speak a lot more to around the agricultural Sabbath is like creative approaches on this continent that Jewish farmers have taken to like embody some of that broader thinking without like to interpret it creatively. So that I can speak more to.
That's very interesting.
Okay.
Yeah, if it's interesting for you to talk about.
Totally, it's super interesting. I think it's one of the most like ancient and innovative ways to think about land, right? It's like, what do we do when we just stopped for the 7th year? Like, do our systems break down? Do we, like, how does it work when we open our gates? And how does it work when we return all lands? And how does it work when we free our slaves, literally and metaphorically? Like, there's a lot in there. So the farm where I work at now, called Abundance Farm in Northampton, is a project of a synagogue. It's a Jewish farm, Jewish Educational Food Justice Project. And for Shemitah, which was this past year, and let me just back up a little bit. There's a 7-year cycle in the Jewish agricultural calendar, and the 7th year, there in the ancient land of Israel, according to the Torah, the Hebrew Bible, the people of the land were commanded to let the land rest for the 7th year. And so basically what that meant was like you weren't allowed to draw any monetary value from the land. Like you still had to feed your animals, you still had to eat, you still could gather, but you couldn't gather, gosh, let's see if I can remember. We can pull up some resources if folks are interested, but like you couldn't gather more than you could use, you couldn't hoard, you couldn't sell. All of your land had to be accessible to everybody else to harvest off of. For all these incredibly, now that we think about them, radical commandments that the people of the land had to practice. And so in bringing a modern lens to those ideas, the farm where I work this year, one thing that we did quite literally is that we opened the gates. We took the doors off of our farm gates. And that's very much a symbolic gesture. It's a community farm, it's downtown, like folks are always coming in and out anyways, but it was a symbolic gesture for us to say, like, this is not our land. Like, the land is not ours, we are the land, and we're taking these gates off as a symbol, literally, a symbol and also a literal invitation that, like, be here. Like, this, the people of this, like, this land is meant to be shared. So we took off the gates, we stopped growing. We left one particular piece of land in cover crop, which was a way that it wasn't fallow, it wasn't like bare soil, but it was left in cover crop to add nutrients, but we weren't gaining anything from it in that time period. We also, we did continue growing our pick your own crops because our pick your own crops are accessible to the entire community. Everybody is welcome to come harvest what they need. And so that felt like a commitment that we would continue because it would continue to serve the broader community. Ways that there are so many ways that people practice it. Oh, I think we didn't harvest from our perennials, if I remember that correctly. I could look this up if you were curious, but there were all these strategic ways that we wanted to implement this thinking of return. And now we're in year 1 again. So with the start of the new year in September, we've entered year 1 of this 7-year cycle, and we're going around again, right? We're like in year 1, we get to think about how to prepare for our next change of cycle, for the next time that we let our fields rest. And that might include, like, you're thinking deeply about reparations, what it means to return money and resource to the formerly enslaved, the descendants of formerly enslaved Black people of our region. We're thinking of, like, there are so many ways to incorporate these bigger questions or these bigger frameworks into like tangible, small scale operations, and ultimately still have to eat. So that's sort of what your question is coming from. That I'm curious about, Danielle, is like on a large scale, the state of Israel, like I can't really speak to things. I don't quite understand. I don't understand how they navigate the lots of things, but that's not personally where my interest lies, because I'm more interested in the like creative approaches. Yeah, that was sort of the
same. No, like as you know, that is so interesting, and thank you for sharing it. And also, as farmers, what a powerful opportunity to reflect.
Yeah,
and to have to change things up a little bit, even if it's for a year. I think it reminds me of this concept of universal design. And actually, I'm familiar with universal design I used to work in disability services as a grant writer, and we were at a point where we were like refurbing all of the homes in our network so that they were accessible to everyone who lived in the houses.
Cool.
And something that came up again and again with this concept was that, like, when you create systems that work best for like the people that, like in this case, it was like the folks who had the most limited ability, it actually works better for everybody.
Yeah.
And in a way, I feel like there's some kind of parallel where it's like when you stop and you rethink, like, how can this system work when we have a limited engagement with the land? It's just going to be like like that's efficient, that's like sustainable, and also like the idea of rest is really important for everybody. So plus it's cool that ancient wisdom often is very radical,
right.
And where we get tripped up is like modern interpretations, or usually more so assumptions.
Right.
You're usually not even looking at what we're making assumptions about. We're just like, well, must be wrong.
Right. Right.
That's cool. And I'm just curious, like from a climate perspective, farming in the desert, like what is that like?
Yeah, totally. That's a great question. Weirdly, that is where I learned, like I started farming was in a desert that was 100% dependent on irrigation systems. Wow. And what it actually taught me more than anything was that I never wanted to farm desert. And but there was some part of me that actually was like, this land isn't meant for agriculture. It's meant for like ancient, like herding and nomadic peoples moving through. And that like growing a row of peppers is bonkers. And so like it was actually like it had the opposite effect. It was like, I love this. I love being engaged with plant life. I love thinking about plants and growing things, but I'm not going to do it here. And I think, yeah, there's something to be said for learning opportunities where you're like, the learning happens in the like in opposition to what the work is. Like I'm learning how not to do something. That was honestly, when I think about that was my biggest takeaway. It's like I have to return to a place where like we have a body, like we have water reserves, and we, and that this land is meant for other types of human engagement, like for nomadic grazing and for So yeah, super good question. Yeah, it was incredibly powerful and illuminating and radicalizing too in political ways. Like, what does it mean to be a Jewish person on land that was not owned by Jews for hundreds of thousands? thousands of years and returned to Jews. And I could also say more about that, but yeah, it really busted my eyes open. I was like, what is happening here? Why are there cows in the middle of the desert? Cows don't like to eat. Like, what's happening?
That's such a trip.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's cool too, because this question of, like, I don't know, I'm so appreciative of the focus on land and land history that has been coming more to the fore. And you just can't get more historical than like the land where like people were first coming into existence and
Fertile
consciousness.
Crescent.
And it's very, I mean, when I was going down a rabbit hole about Mesopotamia, and like, I was like literally saying to my boyfriend, all right, we need to find land where there's two rivers that meet. And he was like, okay, sounds great. But you can imagine, obviously, like, especially for nomadic people at that time, to then come upon a land where it is flourishing, like what an incredible gift that is. That you're like, wow, I've been in the desert. It was very unpleasant, and now it's very good.
Yeah, I mean, I love where I'm rooted now. It's in so much part because like it has the resource that I understand, like that I'm familiar with. My diet is not made up mostly of desert foods and plants. And that sort of stuff. Yeah. Like annual vegetables from the Northeast. So it's beautiful. Yeah.
So cool. Abundance Farm is the name of the
Yeah, it's in Northampton, about an hour away. We totally want people to come visit and hang out, including Springfield people, because you're like down the road. We're always wanting more people in relationship building and young people. And yeah, I'm relatively new to that farm position, but that's the Jewish community that I grew up in. So it's some continuity in terms of where I learned what it meant to be a Jewish person. To me, of course. Yeah. What else might we want to talk about?
I have a question that's maybe not entirely on topic here, but I'll ask it anyway.
Great. We got time.
So you're talking about the context of a farm where it could be helpful to come up with creative solutions, like people shift, switch work shifts depending on, their need for time off. And in a nonprofit context, that we almost are dealing with the opposite, where it's tricky because if certain people are taking time off one day because of one holiday, and then other people are another day, it becomes hard to like schedule meetings because you need like 6 people in a room to have a meeting or something like that. And so I'm wondering if you know of any models more from a nonprofit point of view that deal with this and have a policy of, trying to be inclusive about holidays while still figuring out when everybody can get together and do their thing.
I love that question. Yeah, I mean, it's so real, right? Like in a farming context too, right? Like you need a big enough crew to do the thing, whatever you need to be doing. Yeah, I mean, most of the environments that I have worked in, I have been usually the only person needing a religious accommodation. And there weren't a lot of intersecting accommodations happening at the same time. So I can't speak to that so much from personal experience. But I wonder what resources there are in interfaith nonprofit organizations, like who specifically have staff that are brought together for reasons of religious diversity and cultural diversity, and how they might structure that. Like, I'm trying to think about who those folks might be, but
yeah, I feel like somebody must have a policy about it, and I don't want to go and reinvent the wheel. So I'm just wondering, who's figured this out?
Totally. And personally, like top of the year meetings about just like getting just having each other's calendars, like religious calendars on our Google is really useful. Like just to like, oh yeah, like that's happening, or like having some sense of it ahead of time can be really nice. And you can just like download different religious calendars on Google and like start to integrate that into your culture.
That's really simple. I mean, last year we scheduled a board and staff retreat during Ramadan, and it was like we didn't have that on our calendar when we were sitting down to put the dates down, and so that happened, and we had people whom that impacted.
Totally right. And oftentimes we don't even know who it's impacting because they don't even show up, right? And like they're not even there to self-advocate because like they're doing practice. And so yeah, the more that we're able to know ahead of time what our community is needing, the better. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I want to think about that question. That's really interesting. yeah, I wonder what other like interfaith organizations do in this area. Yeah, cool. Cool. It's good. It's just like it's exciting to know that it's really on the radar of NOFA, and like it's just been really heartening to know that these bigger conversations around diversity, equity, inclusion like have space also for religious practice and experience. And yeah, it's all of a piece. So yeah, I'm really grateful.
Yeah, thank
What else? What other pieces? And also like if y'all want to head out and just like have some time to decompress, that's great too. Like no pressure. Yeah, I'm also happy to stick around. I'm not gonna
Well, this has been really great. And I think it just is like a reminder, like you were just saying, DEI also has to include faith practice. And that's something that usually, at least in my understanding, my personal experience with DEI doesn't necessarily get included, because I think a lot of people feel like, well, we get the holidays off because they're thinking of very particular holidays. But you know, it's important. And something else that comes up when thinking about like running a business or managing a project and having to accommodate for different holidays is that like the reality is when you look at like the totality of like religious tradition and holidays, like maybe also part of it is that our expectations of productivity and our ambitious deadlines sometimes have to be challenged too.
Yeah.
And like not in like a really confrontational way, but just like if you're looking at your calendar for the year and you have all the holidays and to say, okay, well, normally we would use this time to sprint towards such and such a project. Like if we're really making room for everybody to be their full selves, like, is that the healthiest way to do it? That's pretty radical. Like that's a pretty radical way to start to chip away at, just like pressures and expectations that,
Totally.
there's a reason that holidays are considered. Well, it's not really so much about productivity, but it gives us the impression that we can do a lot. The fact that holidays are just like, they're right at the end of the year. Don't the rest of the year, just work. Yeah, this has been great. Thank you, Miriam.
Totally.
Thanks for hosting this conversation on a Saturday, no less.
Yeah, I mean, I also just, something that I forgot to mention that like feels connected, Danielle, to like what you were sharing is that like I've actually become, and this is like a confluence of my own personal journey, but like I've become less observant as a Jewish person with the practice of Shabbat. Like Jewish practice, how do I do this graph with my hands? Jewish practice like minimize itself in obvious ways as my farming commitments increased. And I think that actually is in large part due to work on Saturdays. And I've had the gift of long-term relationships with my bosses who have made accommodations with me over time. But the first 2 years that I worked at my prior job, that's just how it was. And it was hard. It was hard. It made my world smaller. And I was really clear about that with my boss. And I was really lucky that she adjusted over time. But like she set up her calendar so that Saturdays were like a major work day. And it was hard. It was genuinely challenging and like had repercussions that I didn't know would even happen. I had one other thought I wanted to share, Danielle, about what you said. Oh, yes. And this actually maybe is connected, Jocelyn, to what you were asking about just earlier. One thing that can be really cool, I think, and potentially really like fruitful is that a lot of religious practice around the world is based right on land-based cycle. And even if you still have to work or have a meeting on a holiday, like if you're in a land-based organization or farm or project, like acknowledging in a way that actually like is connected to your job can be really powerful, even if it's still a work day, like incorporating like, oh, like Shavuot, that comes, around May, June. It's a celebration of the first fruits, right? Like in a normal, I probably would never ask for Shavuot off because it's not a big holiday in my Jewish practice, but like, what an amazing thing to have the opportunity in a land-based organization to have to say like, hey, today's Shavuot, like, what are the first fruits that we want to celebrate and nod to? Or like, so many of our ancestral traditions, religious and otherwise, like come from the land. And so like, when can we like share those with each other, as just like nourishment? Even if it's not like a no work day, it's still a moment of like honoring and recognizing and celebrating that everyone can benefit from. So that would be awesome.
That is awesome. I feel like that Sukkot is a holiday I've never participated in observing, sadly. I was hoping to do it last year with friends, but that seems like if you have a farm and
Yeah.
there's a strong Jewish tradition on the farm, like a really beautiful opportunity to like welcome people. And that's part of it too, is like on the part of people who aren't observing and maybe don't know as much, and just like an open, willing heart to be like, what is that about? I'm curious, like, and also it's just so darn cool and beautiful. And if you're a farmer, you love it.
Right, right, right.
Get into it,
Right.
go check it out and help.
Right. And there's nothing to be embarrassed about not knowing about another person's spiritual practice too. Like we're all making it up with the vegetables we have or that we've inherited or we've encountered, right? Like it's a big gift when someone like asks you like, what the heck's that about? Like that's a big gift too. I mean, it can be a burden and it can be a gift. Yeah. Well, you guys, yeah, I'm happy to end up or, oh yeah, Jocelyn, you want to take it away?
Yeah, I got my little links to share here.
Right, brilliant. I'm gonna.
Yeah, but first I just want to thank you so much for sharing your time, your experience, and yeah, great to chat with you.